Welcome back to Historical American Girl Read-Alouds. Today we're going to read Chapter 4 of Meet Samantha. And Samantha's starting out in a classroom today. My classroom right now is not painted the right colors, and really all I have that looks like a classroom are the chalkboards. But this is the desk that American Girl made for Samantha. You can see the seat is connected to the desk in front of her, and it has really pretty scroll work here in the iron here. And this is what a desk would have looked like for a girl like Samantha, who her family had a lot of money and she was able to go to a nice school. Schools in the cities for immigrants like Nellie's family would have been really long benches with lots of kids crammed in it. But Samantha was fortunate enough to go to a school where she had a desk just for each student, and it has a little flip top where she could store all of her books and things. Inside Samantha's desk, we have what's called a primer, the Baldwin primer, and that's what they would use to teach kids to read with. And so inside the book, there are pages with the alphabet, learning how to write the alphabet. Then there's information about the flag, there's a song, a few songs, and some other bits of information that get a little bit harder as you go along. So as they became better readers, there was more for them to read. They didn't have as many books as we do today, nowhere near as many books as we have today. So they would have a lot of things just in their one primer. But one thing that looks a lot like today is her composition notebook. Looks almost exactly like the ones today that have paper in it. And in order to write in it, she would use a fountain pen. So this is a little box that slides open. Inside is Samantha's fountain pen. It has a metal tip that she would dip into ink to be able to write in her composition notebook. And in her desk, you can see there's a little hole. That's where they would have put ink. It's called an ink well, so that she could dip her pen in the ink to be able to write. And it has a little indentation at the top here for her pen and pencils to sit on without rolling off, like we have on many desks still today. We have that little indentation. Samantha would have carried her lunch to school in a little tin pail like this. This is made by American Girl, and it opens up, and inside she would have packed a lunch just like we do today. There's her sandwich, and she has some gingerbread cookies as well. So that's Samantha's lunch tin and her desk. And there is a book called Samantha's School Story that hopefully I'll be able to read someday when my schoolroom is a little bit more finished and tell you more about schools during Victorian times. So remember last time we read, Samantha had met Nellie, the little girl who was working at Eddie Ryland's house next door, and she was really excited to have a friend. She was sad to hear that Nellie didn't get the opportunity to go to school, and so Samantha's going to teach her everything when she gets home, was their plan. Chapter 4 is called Gone. By next Tuesday afternoon, Samantha's sampler read, "Actions speak louder there." The sewing hour was almost over when there was a gentle knock on the parlor door. "Come in," said Grandmary, and Jessie came in, dressed to leave for home. She curtsied quickly and waited for Grandmary to speak. Samantha thought Jessie always looked elegant. She was so tall and held her head so high. Jessie looked especially grand today. She was wearing a light brown summer coat that came almost to the floor. But Samantha wondered why she was leaving so early. "Yes, Jessie?" questioned Grandmary. "Ma'am, I've just come to say I won't be coming back now." Jessie said. Samantha almost jumped out of her chair. "Jessie, why?" she asked. Grandmary silenced her with a look that said, "Children should be seen and not heard." She spoke to Jessie. "Very well, Jessie. I'd like to thank you for your service. You have been a great help and a pleasure to us. We shall miss you very much." Samantha was horrified. What was Grandmary saying? How could she just let Jessie go away like that? "You can see Hawkins for your pay," continued Grandmary. "There will be a bonus for you." Jessie curtsied again. "Thank you, ma'am." Before she left, she stopped to smile at Samantha. "Be very good, Miss Samantha. You know I'll miss you." Samantha was too stunned to answer. She watched Jessie go. Then her words rushed out. "Grandmary, why is Jessie leaving? And why did you let her?" Grandmary's eyes never moved from the lacework in her hands. "Please sit down, Samantha," she said. "A young lady must not ask questions of her elders. This is Jessie's business." Samantha sat down, but she could only fidget with her sewing. It seemed as if every stitch she put into her sampler had to be pulled out again. She didn't understand. Why would Jessie leave without explaining? At last the sewing hour was over. Samantha curtsied quickly when Grandmary excused her. Then she rushed out of the parlor to find Mrs. Hawkins, the cook. There was never any problem finding Mrs. Hawkins. She was always in the kitchen. And the kitchen was always filled with the wonderful smells of Mrs. Hawkins' cooking. Today she stood by the big wooden table in the center of the room, rolling pastry for meat pie. She wasn't surprised to see Samantha. The kitchen was one of Samantha's favorite places. She came there often to talk and to eat the treats Mrs. Hawkins saved for her. "Hello, love," Mrs. Hawkins said. "Why are you rushing so? Sit down now and tell me what's the matter. You look like thunder." Samantha flopped herself down on a chair. "Jessie's gone away," she said. "Yes, dear, I know." "Mrs. Hawkins knew? Everybody knew but Samantha." She brushed away a fly that buzzed in from the open windows. "But why?" she asked. "Grandmary didn't even try to stop her." Now, love, you must not fret about it," Mrs. Hawkins said. She took an onion from a bunch hanging by the door and began to peel it. "There are some things you just don't understand. Don't you think your Grandmary knows best?" How could Samantha possibly know if Grandmary knew best? How could she know if anybody knew best? She didn't know what anybody knew. She pushed back her chair and hurried from the kitchen to the butler's pantry. She hoped Hawkins would be there, and he was. Hawkins was whistling softly and polishing silver. He pulled out a chair for Samantha. He was used to her popping up in strange places. They had their best talks when Samantha followed him around on his jobs, waxing furniture, beating the carpets, or washing the windows in Grandmary's big house. Now Hawkins handed Samantha a polishing cloth. He knew how much easier it is to talk when your hands are busy. Samantha rubbed at a sugar bowl. "Jessie's gone," she said. "I know," said Hawkins. Samantha wasn't surprised. "Nobody will tell me why," Samantha went on. Hawkins smiled and his eyes were understanding. But when he spoke, it didn't help much. "Believe me, Miss Samantha, Jessie's fine," he said. "I know it isn't easy, but sometimes when you're young, you just have to trust." Samantha didn't feel much like talking anymore. She pushed back the sugar bowl and cloth, straightened her chair, and slowly left the pantry. As she shuffled past the parlor, Grandmary called. "Samantha?" "Yes, ma'am?" "I've been very pleased with your efforts these past weeks," Grandmary said. "If you go upstairs, you will find something on your bed." For a minute, Samantha forgot about Jessie's leaving. She even forgot to say thank you as she ran up the stairs 2 at a time. Inside her room, Samantha stopped short. There in the middle of her bed was a doll, dressed in shining blue silk. She had a wide silk hat to match. Her soft china hands and face were rosy and delicate. "Oh, Lydia," Samantha whispered. She picked the doll up gently. Then she hugged her very close. So remember, Samantha had asked for this doll that she had seen because she thought the doll looked like her mother who had died, and she was going to call the doll Lydia. It looks like Grandmary purchased the doll for her because she had done all that she promised, like practicing the piano and working on her sampler. I have a book here about Samantha's World in 1904 that talks a little bit about what toys and shop windows and dolls would have been like in Samantha's time. It says store owner L. Frank Baum made happiness moments by creating magical displays for his shop windows. People walking by stopped and stared at the mechanical gadgets he had built. Ferris wheels that turned, stars that twinkled, and butterflies that fluttered. "People will always stop and stare at something that moves," said L. Frank Baum. He was right. By 1904, middle and upper class Americans had more leisure time and had discovered the pleasure of window shopping and buying. You'll notice there is a book, probably a title that's familiar to you, The Wizard of Oz, by L. Frank Baum, the very same shopkeeper who created the happiness moments in window displays. L. Frank Baum wrote this American fairy tale in 1899. The idea for the character of the Tin Man came from one of his store window displays. An American girl made this Wizard of Oz book. I don't have it yet, but I hope to have it someday, especially because my middle daughter's favorite movie was The Wizard of Oz, so that's a special story to me. I also don't have her Lydia doll. I hope to get that one someday too, but that one I've not been able to find, at least not at a reasonable price yet. So other toys that are shown here in this book. The flexible flyer. Both girls and boys sped down the slopes on this popular new sled. So that was what a sled looked like at the time, with metal runners on the bottom. Giddy up and go. Americans shopped for toys more than ever before, and factories stepped up production to meet the demand. Large toys like rocking horses also came from the factory as ready-to-build kits. Fair play. Now that many people had more leisure time, they were able to go to fairs and amusement parks. The new, exciting rides inspired toys like this mechanical Ferris wheel. So the first Ferris wheel was built around this time by a man whose last name was Ferris, and so they started to make toy-sized displays of those. And then there's a picture of Samantha, and I think that's maybe Nellie, looking in the window. Girls like Samantha gazed at the toys in the shop window and dreamed, because toys were very expensive, and as we heard earlier, girls didn't really have a way to make money and buy things. So they just had to stare in the window and hope that their parents would buy them things. In the middle is a dollhouse. Girls spent happiness hours, not just minutes, playing make-believe in the many rooms of their dollhouses. You can see all the rooms there in that dollhouse and all the tiny little things inside. Very detailed and ornate. The first box of Crayola crayons was sold in 1903, so just about the time that Samantha was in school. A lot of these things that we have today were started right around her time because, as they said, more things were being made in factories, and so people had a little bit more time for leisure and a little bit more money. Pretty packages. This cooking set had everything from cabinets to a coffee grinder arranged attractively in one easy-to-purchase package. French bébés. Fancy toy stores carried French bébés or child dolls. This doll was 36 inches tall as a small girl. She came with a dress for each day of the week, matching bonnets and shoes, purses, jewelry, and a hairbrush. So it's hard to tell how big she is there, but American girls are 18 inches. This doll was 36 inches, so almost 3 times as big as Samantha. So you can imagine it was as big as girls. And amazing how those clothes and things that she came with. In the story, a couple things that Hawkins was doing might have sounded unusual. He was polishing silverware. And at the time, a lot of their dishes, especially fancy ones and teapots and things, were made out of real silver. And silver will tarnish or turn kind of gray and black once it is out in the air. It's a chemical reaction between the air and the silver metal. So one way to kind of clean it up and prevent that would be to rub it with the cloth to rub off the tarnish, and then to put a polish on it. That polish put a protective coat between the air and the silver. So that was one of his jobs. And then another job that it mentioned was that he was beating rugs. Vacuum cleaners had not been invented yet. So he would take rugs outside, big area rugs. It wasn't like carpeting that was glued to the floor, but big rugs would go outside and they would beat it with this kind of contraption, maybe a little bit like a wooden fly swatter that was bigger. And that's how they would get the dust and dirt out of their rugs. So there was a lot of work to be done around Samantha's house. And since they had a lot of money, they had hired a lot of servants like Jessie. And poor Samantha's so sad that Jessie is leaving and no one will tell her why. So I wonder what she's going to do. I don't think she's going to leave this question of why Jessie left unanswered, knowing Samantha and how curious and brave she can be. So tune in next time to find out what Samantha does. See you then.